Hey everyone, just a heads up, the next two episodes are one podcast recording that I split in half. This is not to spite you, it's just that producing longer episodes takes a lot more time. So splitting this one up helps keep the workload sustainable and ensure that I can keep the podcast going consistently in the future. That said, there's lots of good content in these episodes, so be sure to listen to them both. With that, let's get into the show. Hey guys, Samuel Allred here. Welcome back to the Persistence Outdoors podcast. Today we're going to talk about something very near and dear to my heart: rain and wet weather. Now, I can't say I enjoy hunting in rain more than in nice weather, but growing up in Western Washington, I spent a lot of time in rain, playing baseball, running, backpacking, all sorts of things. So I have something of a nostalgic connection with gray skies and wet weather. I've also lived in Arizona and Tennessee, and in both places, I've experienced completely different types of rain than what I grew up with, like desert monsoons and crazy thunderstorms. In fact, Nashville, Tennessee actually gets more inches of rain every year than Seattle, Washington. But Seattle has more rainy days altogether. So depending on where you live in the country, your approach to hunting in the rain might look very different. But today we're going to talk about some different strategies for hunting in wet weather, your options for rain gear, and a little bit about how to layer effectively to stay warm in these conditions. I want to start off with a story about rain. When I think of it, there's lots of stories that come to mind, but one story stands out above the rest. When I was about 16 years old, I was the youth leader of my Boy Scout troop, and we set out for an overnight backpacking trip to an alpine lake near Snoqualmie Pass in Washington. It was late March, so right around this time of year. I can't remember why we planned an alpine lake trip in March. We were kind of asking for it, but we did, and predictably enough, as soon as we parked at the trailhead, it started raining. One of the things that I've learned about rain in the Northwest is that sometimes it's just better once you get out into it. It seems a little bit more intimidating when you hear it pounding on the roof or on your car when you're inside. But usually it's not raining that hard, and getting outside feels better than being cooped up inside. So once you just accept you're going to get a little wet, it's fine. Well, I wasn't super excited about hiking in the rain, but we were there and it was time to go. So we piled out of the cars, put our rain jackets on, put covers on our packs, and started heading up the hill. We had a handful of newer scouts on that trip. Usually the shorter hikes were a good way to introduce people to backpacking and help them start building some skills. But unfortunately, their inexperience would come back to bite us on this trip. We started heading up to the lake. It was around 3.5 miles with 2,000 feet of elevation. Really not bad, especially on a trail. But it was raining the whole time, and some of the kids were just not doing well. They weren't in great shape, they didn't pack well, and were carrying awkward loads. And some of them were trying to hike in ponchos. But they would do silly things like not put their hood on, or one kid was just having a bad attitude and wouldn't tie his shoes. So just some little ridiculous things like that just made it harder on themselves. Myself and others in the group were doing fine. The rain was getting worse and beginning to soak through our rain jackets, but at least we were protected from the wind and had some layers to keep warm. So myself, my 2 younger brothers on the trip, one of my cousins, we were all dressed with a good rain jacket, and we were doing better. It wasn't enjoyable, but as long as we kept moving and had a good attitude, we were pretty much okay. Our rain jackets, though, were definitely soaked through. You'll hear people talk about their rain jacket getting wetted out or wetting out. And that's when the rain jacket just gets so wet that it's unable to stay waterproof anymore and the water starts soaking through. So that was happening and we were just getting pretty wet. So as we go up, the rain just progresses from bad to worse. And when we finally make it up to the lake, the rain turned to sleet. It was almost comically bad. Like, just when you thought it couldn't get worse, it does. But the good news was that we could finally stop and set up our tents. So we get our tents set up in the rain, and once we finally get those up, we have some shelter. I was in a tent with my brother, one of my brothers who at the time was just a tiny 11-year-old. So I got him in there. We rolled out our sleeping bags that we had packed in trash bags to keep them dry. And he took off his soaked shell layer and got into his sleeping bag. And at that point, he's basically safe, right? Being wet in 40-degree weather is a bad deal, but you could spend a lot of time in 40-degree weather in a dry sleeping bag. So he's pretty much out of harm's way, and I'm feeling a little bit more relaxed, and I go to check on the other scouts. My other brother and cousin did the same thing with their tent. They set it up, they got in dry sleeping bags. But then the adult leader from the troop comes over to me and basically tells me that a handful of the scouts had got their sleeping bags completely wet. They hadn't packed their bags in anything waterproof, and their bags were now completely soaking wet. And these were the same kids who were really struggling on the way up. So we go over and check on these kids, and they're all cold. Everything they have is soaked. And at this point, the leader basically asked me to make a call. He's saying, should we pack up and head back to the cars since these kids are not functioning well and are now at major risk for hypothermia? And eventually, that's what we did. We packed up and went right back down the mountain. Looking back on it all, I kind of wish we had toughed it out and worked on our survival skills, whether that meant attempting to build a fire or using an emergency burrito to get these kids warmed up. But honestly, I wouldn't have wanted to put a wet teenager in my dry sleeping bag. And in hindsight, I may be downplaying the actual seriousness of the scenario. I also could have done better making sure that they had the right gear before setting out and that they were packed appropriately. But you live and you learn. So anyway, I'm sure it wasn't a fun day for them. They were pretty tired, but I can tell you they moved a lot faster heading back to the cars, and they were pretty much okay as long as we kept moving. So that story always sticks out to me, and it actually illustrates a lot of the different things we're going to talk about today, some good and some bad. So let's start out with the main strategies for hunting in wet and rainy weather. So there's a couple different ways you can approach hunting in rainy weather. And these aren't groundbreaking strategies or anything, but hopefully thinking about them will give you some more ideas for how to manage moisture when you're out in the rain, in the cold. So the three different approaches are just to tough it out, to stay dry in the first place and not get wet, or to dry out, which is sort of the long-term strategy component of toughing it out. So let's talk about toughing it out. Generally, this is more of a short-term strategy, right? If you're on a day hunt or there's just a squall passing through, it's okay if you're out in the elements. It's okay if you get a little bit wet, because on a day hunt, you can just walk back to the truck or go home if it gets too bad. And in a squall, hopefully you have some rain gear, you can wait it out, and it will pass over you, and then you can keep hunting, right? If you need to tough it out, if you're in a situation where it's cold, you can keep moving and you'll stay warm. And that is one strategy for a lot of people who are hiking in cold rain. If you just keep moving, you're going to be able to stay warm. And that's really the danger of being out in wet and cold weather, is that you're going to lose your warmth and lose energy and get hypothermic, right? But as long as you keep moving, you're probably going to be okay. Also, you can layer effectively to stay warm even when wet. So we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but by using the right materials, by using the right layers, you can be wet and be somewhat uncomfortable, but still stay warm enough while you're out there. Lastly, you only want to tough it out when it's not dangerously cold. So if it's 35 degrees and raining, at that point, it may just be a better time to look for some shelter. Because if you get wet and you're 5 miles into your hike or to your hunt, if you get really wet and it's 35 degrees and maybe the temperature's dropping, now you're in a really potentially dangerous situation. So sometimes you need to make a call to find shelter and not just tough it out. When you're cold like this, you want to look out for the umbles. These are signs of hypothermia. So stumbles, mumbles, grumbles, and fumbles. It's kind of funny mentioning these because this kind of describes a lot of my time playing outside as a kid. But the stumbles are making mistakes with your feet, falling, taking bad steps. Mumbles are where you're starting to slur your speech. Grumbles, feeling grumpy and frustrated. And then fumbles, losing your fine motor skills in your hand. I think that's especially the one that went first for me as a kid, and sometimes still now when I get really cold. So if it's dangerously cold, if it's getting into a range where you're at risk for hypothermia, you may want to use the next strategy, which is just to stay dry. You live to hunt another day, right? And sometimes when the conditions are too wet and too cold, your time would be better spent hunting once the rain stops anyway. I'm not saying this is every hunt. There are hunts when you're just going to have to hunt in the rain, but you need to consider your experience level, your comfort level, how your body responds to cold, and make a good decision for you. To stay dry, you've got a couple different options, right? One is to wear rain gear. But that's not the end of the story, because in rain gear, if you're moving at all, moisture can collect on the inside of the rain gear. And some rain gear is more breathable and will let some of this moisture out. Some is less breathable, but no rain gear is completely breathable, right? By having that water impermeable membrane, you are giving up some breathability automatically. So when you're wearing rain gear, that's not the end of the story. You also need to slow down. If you don't want to get wet, you need to slow down and make sure you're not sweating. So making a big effort up a hill is not going to go well in rain gear, because even if you're keeping water out, you're going to sweat on the inside and then become potentially just as wet. So you need to slow down, and hopefully you can move less or even not at all. If you have really good rain gear, you could sit out a decent amount of rain by just staying in one place and not sweating and just letting the rain gear do its thing. And if it's got a good durable water repellent coating, if it's got a good membrane, you're likely to be able to survive that rain until it stops. Another option is to find shelter. When we're hunting and backpacking, this is most likely going to be a tarp or a tent. It could also be natural shelter, like a cave or some thick trees where you're getting a little bit less rain underneath them. So finding some shelter is just a great way to, again, stay out of the rain, stay out of the wind, retain some warmth and energy, and stay dry until the rain passes over. And using a tarp as a part of your rain gear, in a sense, isn't a bad idea, because even the best rain gear is eventually going to wet out. Even the best rain gear may get a little bit wet on the inside from sweat. So using a tarp to actually cover yourself from rain in addition to your rain gear is not a bad idea to stay completely dry. And you could still be out in the backcountry glassing or hunting, but having that tarp allows you to stay out there safely for longer. Another component of staying dry in the first place is keeping your pack or the contents of your pack dry. So in the example, these kids didn't have the contents of their pack in any sort of dry bag or trash bag to keep it dry. And a lot of things in your pack or even your pack itself could get wet, and that would be fine. But if your sleeping bag or other insulation layers get wet, all of a sudden you're in trouble. Some sleeping bags, synthetic ones, are going to do better when they get wet and still keep you somewhat warm. But generally, there are things that you want to keep dry in your pack. So using a pack cover is a great way to start, just to cover everything in your pack. And then if it's going to be really wet and just constantly raining, putting your gear in a dry bag or putting them in a trash bag and using a combo of a pack cover and a dry bag is a really good way to keep your contents nice and dry. So once you get to camp and set up your tent and have some shelter, you can have those dry insulation layers and sleeping bag. You don't even need a pack cover if you have a dry bag in your backpack. I still think it's nice though, because your backpack can soak up a lot of water and get really heavy. So having a pack cover over everything helps a lot. And if you don't have a pack cover, you can even fashion a black trash bag into a pack cover. You just rip it apart or tie it on a little bit. It's not the fanciest, but it can get the job done. All right, so the third strategy is to dry out. So this is assuming that either you don't have the opportunity to stay dry, like you've got wet or you had to move in the rain, or this is more of a longer trip where you're just out in the elements and you're going to have to go through this natural cycle of getting wet and drying out. So you may have toughed it out and now you're a little bit wet. What do you do to get dry? Or say something in your pack has gotten wet. What do you do to dry that out so that you can get warm again? If it's possible, building a fire is a great option. It's tough in wet conditions and it's not possible everywhere. There may even be burn bans, just depending on the season and where you're at. So fire is an option though, and if you can build a fire, if you can find some dry wood to do that, that's going to be a great option to keep you warm and to dry out anything that's gotten wet. Now you can also take advantage of the wind. Often in the spring, if we're thinking about bear hunting, often in the spring you have a lot of wind, or if you're in the mountains, you have a lot of thermals. So you can find a windy place and just hang up a clothesline. Put your sleeping bag on the clothesline, put some clothes on it, and let the wind do its work and help dry off those garments. One thing that backpackers talk about is a yard sale. With backpackers or through hikers, they have to keep moving to stay on schedule. And it may be important to stay on schedule just depending on how long their trip is, right? They may be traveling through rain and maybe moving and hiking in the rain and just not able to avoid getting wet. So the idea of a yard sale is once you get to a stopping place and the rain has stopped or the storm has moved over, you get everything out of your backpack, you lay it out on the ground, and you let it dry out. And maybe you don't even let it dry out all the way, you just let it dry out as you're stopping for lunch, and then you pack it back up again and keep going. Or if you have a couple hours and you can take a break, you let it dry out all the way. But you just get everything out. You get your tent, you get your sleeping bag, everything that's a little bit damp, and just spread it out, hopefully in some sun if there's a break in the clouds, and let it start to dry. And this is just kind of how you do it when you're out for multiple days. You just have to find opportunities to let things dry out and prioritize that when it's available. A fourth way to dry out is to use your synthetic or hydrophobic down sleeping bag. So with a synthetic sleeping bag, you can still have a decent amount of warmth even when that sleeping bag is wet. And what this means is that you can climb into it damp or with some wet clothing. And if you have enough body heat, it can actually help to dry your clothing and pull some of that moisture out of your clothing, which helps you get dry. And then also that will help you stay a little bit happier the next day you're hunting or hiking or whatever. It's important not to do this in a down sleeping bag unless you're just a little bit damp. If you got enough water on a down sleeping bag, you could start to damage the loft potential of that down sleeping bag. But with a synthetic bag or even a treated down bag that has that hydrophobic treatment on the feathers, you can actually get in there, and as long as you're creating enough warmth, you can dry out your clothes and dry out yourself. Now, this may not be the most enjoyable experience. You may spend a while being cold before it starts to work. And I also wouldn't recommend this for kids, I guess. When I was little, I just had no body heat, it seemed like. So if you're a really cold person or you just wouldn't do well with that, you might want to test it or think about that before you do that. But if you can generate some body heat, if you've had some food, if you maybe have some hand warmers or warm water bottles in there with you, you can use that as a strategy to dry some clothing out and be more comfortable for the next day. Your mileage may vary on this, so maybe test it out with your specific gear before you try this as your main strategy for drying out, but it is something that you can do. When it comes to drying out, certain materials are going to dry out faster than other materials. You may have heard the phrase cotton kills, and that's because cotton, once it gets wet, it stays wet and cold, and it takes a very long time to dry out. So think about the materials you're using both in your gear and in your clothing. Synthetics are going to dry out faster. Wool is not going to dry out as quickly as synthetics, but it can still keep you somewhat warm while it's wet, and it will dry eventually. So think about the materials you're using when you know that you are going to have to go through this process of drying out on a hunt. All right, let's talk about some of your options for rain gear. I'm going to focus on rain shells because I think they're the most applicable to hunting, but I will touch on the other options as well. There's a couple different types of rain shells. And when I say rain shell, I'm referring to a synthetic, usually thin, technical jacket that's purpose is to repel rain, but not really add much warmth. It's also good for cutting the wind. So there's a couple different categories of rain shells, and I'm going to go through them and talk about the pros and cons. The way that they are categorized in the outdoor industry are 2-layer, 2.5 layer, and 3-layer. These are confusing and there can be overlap in between them, but let's go through them. A 2-layer rain jacket is kind of at the bottom of the pile. It's usually the most inexpensive, which is nice. It's constructed of a durable face fabric like nylon, backed by a breathable membrane, and then it will have a liner on the inside of the jacket. And what this liner does is it protects the waterproof membrane from oils and dirt and sweat, which can compromise that membrane. And so this jacket basically has, like the name suggests, 2 layers, the outer fabric and the inner liner. The good thing about these jackets is, like I said, they're inexpensive. You can get these for $40 to $100, and they're going to do the job to keep rain out pretty well. The downside is that they're often a little bit more heavy. They are not as packable as some of these other jacket options, and they tend to be the least breathable option because that liner can trap some moisture if it's not mesh. And also, they're usually just not built with the most technical breathable fabrics. So often they're a little bit heavier, they're a little bit bulkier. Really, they're great for use around town or for taking the dog for a walk, but that extra weight and that bulkiness can make it a little bit of an issue in your pack. A 2.5 layer rain jacket is a little bit different. And it's confusing because if you look at a 2.5 layer rain jacket, it actually looks like just one piece of fabric or material. It's kind of like wearing a plastic bag in some ways. And so I think it should be called something different. I think it should be called maybe a 1-layer rain jacket. But in the industry, they call it a 2.5 layer. And that's what you'll see when you're shopping on REI website or Marmot or Outdoor Research or wherever you get your rain jacket. So a 2.5 layer has a durable face fabric. It's going to usually be nylon again. Then there's going to be a waterproof membrane, and this is often a breathable waterproof membrane as much as they can be breathable. And then the 0.5 layer is actually just a coating that is applied to the inside of the jacket that helps protect that waterproof membrane, again, from oils and sweat and dirt. The 2.5 layer is nice because it is light, it's packable, it's very simple, it doesn't add a whole lot of warmth, which can be nice if you just want something to throw on your existing layers. And it's really one of the best options for backpack hunting and backpacking in general because it just doesn't take up a lot of space or weight. Some of the issues with a 2.5 layer rain jacket, though, are that if you don't have a long sleeve layer underneath it, that membrane can feel clammy against your skin, and it can kind of feel like wearing just a plastic bag. If you have any moisture buildup between you and the rain jacket, it can feel just a little bit wet and uncomfortable, and that's not the nicest feeling. They're also not as sturdy as the next rain jacket that we'll talk about, the 3-layer. They are prone to delamination, so that inner coating rubbing off or separating, and then the durable face fabric and the waterproof membrane coming apart. I've seen this happen before. I think it was after I put one of these through a washer, or it was just getting old. And so that delamination then makes it pretty much not work as a rain jacket anymore. And because these are thinner and very lightweight usually, they can be prone to getting snagged on something and making a hole in it, and therefore defeating the purpose of your rain jacket. So they're just not as durable as some other options. They're probably not as durable as 2-layer rain jackets either. That said, there's a wide range for 2.5-layer rain jackets. And so on the bottom end, you're going to have cheaper materials. And on the top end, you're going to have more durable materials, right? So it just kind of depends on the jacket. I have the most experience with 2.5-layer rain jackets. They're really good for when you're going to get a moderate amount of rain and you just need something to throw on, but you don't want to add a whole lot of warmth. With a 3-layer jacket or with a less breathable 2-layer jacket, there's a chance that you're adding in a lot of warmth when you add that extra layer. But with a 2.5-layer, you can layer how you want to. You can be walking around, and then when it rains, just throw that on. And that's what I usually used when I was doing a lot of backpacking and hiking in the Northwest. Now, the third type of rain jacket is a 3-layer rain jacket. And this is going to be your most robust rain jacket generally speaking. There's a lot of overlap between the 2.5 layer and the 3-layer rain jackets. You'll find some 3-layer rain jackets that kind of behave more like a 2.5 layer rain jacket. And then you'll find some 3-layer jackets that are more like a hard shell sort of ski jacket. So there's a wide range, like I've said before, but 3-layer jackets are usually going to be constructed with that durable face fabric, a waterproof membrane, often something like Gore-Tex, and then on the inside, they're going to have a lining laminated to the waterproof membrane. So it ends up being kind of one laminate piece of fabric with the waterproof membrane sandwiched between the face fabric and the lining. And the lining will often be something kind of soft, like tricot. Something soft and that feels nice on the skin and can also help with wicking some moisture to keep it off your skin and feel more comfortable. With a 3-layer rain jacket, you're generally getting the most long-term durability, whereas a 2.5-layer rain jacket is good to throw on in a rainstorm and is good for occasional use. If you're really going to be living in your rain jacket, you might want to spring for a 3-layer jacket because they're just usually constructed a little bit more durably. And if you were to be walking through brush or needing to wear it every day, all day, it may be worth it to have that extra protection. Also, 3-layer jackets are often made with the best waterproof materials in terms of waterproofness and breathability. So 3-layer jackets are often made with Gore-Tex in them or something similar. And this does allow some breathability and can feel better than a 2.5-layer jacket or a 2-layer jacket that's made with cheaper materials. Again, just depends on the construction, of course. But as a general rule, those 3-layer jackets are going to be made with a breathable waterproof membrane. The disadvantages of a 3-layer jacket are that they can be less packable than a 2.5-layer jacket, and they can be a little bit heavier, and they're likely going to add a little bit more warmth, which can be an advantage or a disadvantage depending on what you're looking for. Oh, and I should add, the 3-layer rain jackets are usually going to be the most expensive. You are getting that long-term durability, which is great, and it's not going to come apart or delaminate like a 2.5-layer could. It's definitely a nicer product than a 2-layer rain jacket, but they often do come with a higher price tag, just depending on the jacket. All right, guys, that's the end of part 1. Thanks so much for listening. We'll pick up right where we left off next week.